Okay, so, Krishnamurti said, time is the enemy of man. Time is the enemy of man. Meet it and go beyond it. So, we're asking, does inner transformation not involve time in some respect? So there are a few points about this that need to be made just to clarify the question. First of all, and most fundamentally, Krishnamurti did not use the word time necessarily in the ordinary sense, or rather, he acknowledged what he called physical time, or chronological time, which is what most of us mean just by time. That is time. That's the only time there is. There's no other kind of time. There's just time, which is time by the clock or your watch, time by the calendar. There is no other kind of time. That is time. But Krishnamurti predicated or proposed what he considered to be an entirely different kind of time, which he called psychological time. And he said that psychological time, we'll have to go into exactly what he seemed to mean by that, but he proposed that actually in our day-to-day life, this thing that he called psychological time is much more active and vital and present than chronological time, even though we ourselves don't draw any distinction between physical and psychological. He said there is a very, very important distinction, and that the psychological time is really what dominates our lives. And he furthermore said that psychological time is illusory in some sense. So that's the kind of time he meant when he said time is the enemy of man. He didn't mean time by the clock or the calendar. And somewhat beyond that, in a somewhat similar vein, he said, there is no psychological evolution. The whole idea of evolving, becoming something more or better psychologically, he said, is illusory. And the dialogues that we mentioned earlier, the sequence of dialogues that he had with David Bohm, 15 dialogues they conducted in 1980 were published as a book. And the people who were responsible for editing those dialogues and publishing the book gave it the title, The Ending of Time. And I feel like that's an unfortunate title, because unless someone is already familiar with Krishnamurti's philosophy, they must think that that means the ending of ordinary time, chronological time, because that's the only kind of time that most of us even recognize exists. So if you hear there's a book by some man that you don't know very much about, but he has a name, Krishnamurti, and he's got a book called The Ending of Time, it sounds like hocus pocus, something rather strange, and the apparent meaning of that title really has nothing to do with what he's actually talking about, which is the ending of psychological time. So, how does this relate to inner transformation? It relates in part because Krishnamurti said transformation does not occur in time. And this is important to understand, that by transformation, as we were saying previously, has a great deal to do with perception or insight. And Krishnamurti made a major point of saying that insight, he said insight is not caused. It's not part of a sequence of cause and effect. And the insight itself is outside of the movement of time. And now here the meaning of time becomes a little bit blurred or confusing. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to go into this question, because when Krishnamurti says insight occurs outside of time, he seems to be referring in that case to chronological time, which is surprising because almost always he only talks about psychological time. But insight, he says, occurs in a flash, and that implies, some sort of instantaneousness in chronological time. So there's some kind of distinction that he ordinarily observes, which doesn't necessarily get observed with respect to insight. And insight is of the nature of transformation. So in some sense, it seems as though he might be saying that transformation not only doesn't take place in psychological time, but also not even in chronological time. So this is rather confusing. How can that be? And it's especially confusing in the context of various other things he says, such as he says, one must be diligent. He says that self-knowledge, self-understanding is arduous. It requires application. You have to pay attention, throughout the day. Observe all of your thoughts and feelings. He recommends sometimes writing down your thoughts and feelings. All of this is a process in time, at least chronological time. So then how can he say that there is no time associated with transformation? It's really a bit of a puzzle, and it's one of those, therefore, it's one of those areas of the teachings that I feel requires some clarification, let's put it that way. So that's the general territory that we want to discuss in this section of our seminar. And I would just like to add that I don't want to get through this particular discussion without exploring with a good deal of focus, is there really a valid distinction between chronological time and psychological time? Krishnamurti is very, very firm on this, and he makes a very big deal out of it. But it seems to me worthwhile to question whether that distinction really holds up, or under what circumstances it holds up. So those are the issues that we have before us for the next hour and a half. And I think that's all I have to say, unless you'd like to pitch in.
Yeah, I think this is related to some extent to what we were saying in the morning session, that our experience has been that we can conceive of an ideal or a design to be achieved, get the tools, including the money, to achieve it, make a willful effort, and realize it, make it happen. That's how you build a house, that's how you make a garden, that's how you learn driving or language. And in all those achievements, chronological time is involved, practice and willful effort is involved, and a certain kind of intelligence is involved, which requires time to acquire. And then we tend to extrapolate that experience into the field of the psyche and feel that I can transform myself gradually over a period of time by first doing this, then doing that, then achieving, preparing myself, and gradually come upon the truth. And he's saying that in this field, to posit an ideal and then try to achieve it is illusory. It sustains the ego. And the ego is the greatest barrier to learning and also the greatest source of illusions. So you can't end the illusion through an ego process, since the ego process is the greatest source of illusions. So he demands that we approach life differently in understanding our psyche or in seeking deeper transformation within our consciousness. And that requires perception, a direct perception of what is true and what is false, so that the false, namely the illusion, ends. And this requires a creative insight, because we don't know what the false is. In our conditioning, there is a lot that is false. But the quality of illusion is that the mind that has an illusion is not aware that it is in illusion. When it is aware that it is in illusion, then that illusion does not cause disorder. For instance, fairy tales are illusions. They have been written for entertainment of children. And we don't mistake them for reality, for an actuality. So when you know that an illusion is an illusion, it doesn't create any disorder in consciousness. It's when you take an illusion to be true and you base your decisions and your conduct on that, that it leads to conflict and division and disorder. Because my illusion can be different from your illusion. My truth is not different from your truth. The truth is a truth, whether for an American or an Indian or a Christian or a Hindu. The truth is the same, namely a fact of nature. So just as scientific truth is the same all over the universe, in the same way, Krishnamurti is positing that the truth about our consciousness, the truth about human beings and about the source of desire and illusion and so on, is common to whole mankind. The truth is also universal. That truth is also universal. There is no separate truth. But we don't know that truth. So how do you gradually progress towards something that is unknown? You can't have a path to the unknown. And to rely on time is to have a destination and a path which takes time to achieve that. And he said it's not that process, it's a process of perception. Perception is action here. And perception has no cause. It requires a certain approach which he called the learning mind, which is not the reacting mind. We went into that this morning, that the ego is a reacting mind. And perception demands a learning mind which is observing without reacting and only trying to understand the causation, the cause and effect relationship. What happens and why it happens and what causes which effect. So he's sort of saying that there is a cause and effect chain which goes on, and we are often only interested in dealing with the last effect or controlling the last effect, whereas you need to go to the source of the chain and eradicate the whole chain from there, which requires a deep understanding and attention and persistent observation with a learning mind. A learning mind is a mind that says, I don't know, but I want to discover what the truth is. I am not sure about all these ideas that I have read about, because I have not perceived the truth of that for myself. I'm reminded of a dialogue where he is, which is on video, where he is addressing students in Brockwood, and he says to them that the words of the Buddha and of Jesus Christ are illusions for you because you have not discovered the truth of that for yourself. So one student asks, "Sir, aren't your words also illusions for us?" And he says, "Yes, if you accept them." So he's very clear in his mind that if you merely accept on the authority of the teacher a certain idea, that is not the truth. Idea is not the truth. Truth lies at the level of perception. And time doesn't help you to come upon perception, because perception is being veiled by the ego process and by the illusions that are already there in our conditioning, in our mind. That is what is preventing us from perceiving the truth. So what is needed is to unlearn the false in order to see clearly what the truth is. We have the organs of perception. I want to perceive the truth, but I am myself in the way, in the sense that all those illusions are part of me, and they prevent me from perceiving the truth. Otherwise, these are eternal truths. They have existed thousands of years ago, and the Buddha and Jesus and so on have perceived them, Socrates probably, and they are there now, and we are wanting to perceive them. What is there between us and the truth that blocks it? Only our own concepts and our own ideas in the head. So you have to get free of those, or at least the coloration of those or the domination of those, so that you can doubt. When you doubt them, there is a certain amount of freedom. You may not have dropped them completely, but you are questioning them. As soon as you begin to question whether is this true, you are already a little bit free from it, and that freedom is necessary. The freedom from the known is necessary in order to discover something which is unknown. Otherwise, the insight is blocked by the existing knowledge, which interprets any perception in terms of the existing knowledge. Even the discoveries in arts or music or science, any kind of creative perception occurs like that. It is not a result of the known. It is a capacity of the human consciousness to make a foray into the unknown, pick up something that was no connection with the known and bring it into the field of the known, and thereafter try to communicate it. All great religious teachers have tried to do that. The Buddha broke away from Hinduism, which was his training. Jesus Christ broke away from Jewish religion, which was his training. Krishnamurti broke away from theosophy, which was his training. So this breaking away from the past and perceiving something which is beyond the known, that is an insight. An insight doesn't take place in time, because it's not a gradual process of thinking and preparing and so on. In fact, that is the block. The psychological time is the block. The idea that it will take me time to gradually arrive at the truth is a false notion, and that false notion is one of the barriers that blocks us, because it creates hope. It enables you to postpone perception. It enables you not to see the urgency of insight. It says, I'll come upon it gradually. So when you say, in 10 years' time I will become non-violent, you're actually giving yourself the license to remain violent for 10 more years. And at the end of 10 years, you won't be able to end the violence for the same reason you are not ending it now. it doesn't have to go gradually. It doesn't require an effort of suppression, which is gradual process of training, but it requires a totally new perception and the freedom from the past. So all major discoveries in science also have happened that way. If we look at Einstein's discovery that space and time are not independent of each other. It was an assumption in classical physics in which he was trained that space and time are completely independent things. One never creates the other or confuses with the other. And in our daily life, also in his life, there was no experience where time and space interacted with each other. So how did he come upon that truth? It was not in his training. It was not part of the known. So how did he come to that? All he knew was that something is wrong somewhere, and I'm not able to explain everything logically and rationally. And experiments are showing that our picture is incomplete. So something is not known, and usually you have to question the assumptions on which it is based. And he questioned this assumption that space and time are independent of each other by doing a thought experiment where he imagined what it would be like to be riding on a beam of light, traveling with the velocity of light. How would phenomena appear to a man who is traveling in the velocity of light? And because we never experience those velocities, we never see the confusion between space and time. And he came upon this discovery. So the known and the logic and the experimentation and the thought process were important because they created the question, but they don't lead to the answer. The answer lay in perception of something from the unknown, which we call the insight. And that requires a certain amount of freedom from the existing knowledge or the conditioning in your mind. Unless you're willing to doubt it and question it, you can't come upon the known. If you are too sure of your assumptions, then you cannot come upon the unknown perception. So it is in that sense that he says, I think, it is in that sense that he says that psychological time is an illusion. If you are not, to take an example, if I am not happy now, whatever might be my circumstances and so on, if I am dissatisfied and I am not happy, I have to look into the causes of the dissatisfaction. But it's not that I need something more in order to become happy. That's an illusion. But it's a very persistent illusion, and people want to achieve more, get something more, either as knowledge or as virtue or as intelligence, to acquire something more in order to become happy. But what you acquire is knowledge, and knowledge is not perception. So 10 years ago I had a certain amount of knowledge and I was dissatisfied, and now I have some more knowledge and I'm still dissatisfied. For the same reason you are dissatisfied, for which you were dissatisfied 10 years ago. And 10 years hence also you will be dissatisfied for the same reason. It has not to do with how much knowledge or how much property or how much virtue you have already acquired. It depends on how you are looking across the line. If you are still looking across the line with desire to acquire something more, then that is the egoistic approach, and that will create the unhappiness 10 years from today as it does today. So there was also this question, I think one of your questions yesterday, one of you raised the question, what does it mean the other man is myself? And the Buddha answered it like this. He said, two human beings differ from each other only as much as two candles differ from each other. And that difference is not more than the difference between what this candle is now and what it was 1 hour earlier. Now, in terms of the known, it means that 10 years ago, I had not read the books, I had not had the experiences which I have had in the last 10 years. So the Krishna of 10 years ago differs from the Krishna of today in knowledge and experience. But for the same reason that he was dissatisfied with knowledge and experience, he will again be dissatisfied with knowledge and experience today. So in that sense, time does not help. And the only difference between me and you is in the knowledge, in the memory. Otherwise, the body is exactly the same, the consciousness functions exactly the same, the truths are exactly the same, but my illusions are different from your illusions. Your concept of God is different from my concept of God. What you have been conditioned into is different from what I have been conditioned into. So the difference between me and you is not more than the difference between me and what I was 10 years ago, which is I also didn't have that much knowledge and that much experience as I have now. And the only difference between me and you is of knowledge and experience. In that sense, the other man is yourself. And we are same, but when we give too much importance to our conditioning, what we have learned, when we are attached to it, when we identify with it, when we derive importance to it, you are giving far more importance to a very superficial layer of your consciousness, which is just the conditioned part of this lifetime. When millions of years past have produced the body and the brain and all the instincts, all of which is the same for all of us share in common that million years of past. But just this past, from the birth till now, is different because we are born in a different place, eat different food, speak different language, and so on. So he says that it is this illusion of identification or with what we know, attachment to what we know, that divides us. It's the illusion that divides us. It is otherwise you would perceive that the other man is yourself. There's hardly any difference or negligible difference between us. And all our divisions, all our wars, everything begin from this division. So the fact is that the Arab and the Jew are the same, but they don't think so. They perceive each other as very different from each other because they have a different concept of God and different ideas about what is virtue and so on. And that's all. Otherwise, in body and in consciousness, we are exactly the same. So time does not help you to do this. We have been making efforts through United Nations for 70 years, 80 years to patch up the quarrel between Israel and Arabs or in Kashmir. And how much have we moved? We are back in square one. Nothing has changed. Because you are not attacking the root of the problem. The division is there much before all this war situation develops. The two communities hate each other. That hatred is based on illusion. And if you get rid of that illusion, you will solve the problem. But you are not learning about it, you are only adamant about it. And you take it that the illusion is that I am very different from them and they are my enemies. That's an illusion. It's not true. It's based on illusion. But therefore, time will not help to end this. And that's what it means, that there is no psychological evolution. And that's also the reason why this division has never ended. We have been, all our history is full of wars for 5,000 years. It's become the tradition, we have accepted it. And we are not willing to look into the deeper causation, why there is this division and hatred between human beings, which ultimately leads to war. We call it a war only when it manifests in the form of armies moving, guns shooting, and planes bombing each other's land and so on. But much before that, psychological warfare is going on. So in that sense, the Third World War is already on. But we are waiting for the Third World War to begin because we want only a certain level of manifestation when we call it a war. And that's an illusion. It's a one continuum. So it's already on. And you are not looking at this because you are just waiting that we will prevent the Third World War from starting. And that's all. So that is the illusion in the mind. And illusions don't go away with time. They become tradition. Unless you question them and doubt it, you won't transform. And so inner transformation is not a matter of time. In fact, when you depend on time, time becomes an enemy of man. It prevents him from perceiving. When you realize that time is not helping you, then it's a crisis. It's like your house on fire. You don't ask for time. You just rush and get water and act and do what you can because there is an urgency. You have no time. But when you have time, you say, I'll go to the library, I'll read what the Buddha has said, I'll go to some other guru, some ashram, I'll perform this, perform that, maybe I'll get there. So gradually and so on. And he's paying that's an illusion.
So we're looking at this question of transformation, inner transformation, principally in terms of illusion and perception.
Discovery, yeah. In terms of discovery of the truth, yeah.
Just wanted to make a couple of little points.
Sure.
We say a fairy tale, the child may consider it to be an actuality, but we don't consider it. But I think that the distinction between illusion and non-illusion is not always quite so sharp, because we don't consider the fairy tale to be an actuality. We are aware that it's an illusion, but one of the great literary critics, it was Wordsworth or Coleridge, I think. Coleridge said that when we enter into a work of art, a play by Shakespeare, or nowadays a movie or a book, we exercise what he called the willing suspension of disbelief. We put aside our awareness that it's an illusion in order that we can enter into it and take it as if it were real. And because we take it as if it were real, it has very powerful effects upon us. It becomes a kind of actuality, and this phenomenon can become really strong. Some of you might be aware of this series of shows on television called Game of Thrones, which went on for, I think, 73 episodes over a period of 8 years. And the final episode finally aired. I won't tell you what happened, no. But the final episode aired about a week ago, and 1.4 million people signed a petition to the producers saying, we didn't like the way you ended that. We demand that you redo it, because we wanted something different to happen. So the people were really engaged, as if you ask them, do you think that it's real? They say, of course I know it's not real, but they're tremendously engaged. So an illusion can be not necessarily so cut and dried or categorical whether or not we are.
But you know it's a story.
You know it's a story.
Yeah, it's a story, and you know that you have consciously suspended your disbelief and entered into it with a view to gain experience, and from experience you can learn, because our own personal experience is so limited. I mean, I've never been in war, but I can read War and Peace by Tolstoy, and in reading that novel I can go through the experience of the hero in going through war and so on, and learn from that what happens to the human being in war and in that. So you learn vicariously from another person's experience, because the human being is the same, the consciousness is the same. So whatever he is going through, you can put yourself in his position and vicariously experience what he is going through. But that is like a play. It is a conscious thing of putting your mind through experience. What is important is whether you are picking up truths out of that experience or you are picking up new prejudices. And that is the learning mind. The learning mind ensures that you don't pick up prejudice from experience. Otherwise, if experience brought wisdom, then all old people should be wise, which is not an observed fact. Because they are far more experienced than young people. The reason is that experience also brings prejudice. You also pick up false notions out of experience, not necessarily truths. So this ability to question, to doubt, and not quickly come to a conclusion, but to stay with a question in order to have a deeper insight into what is true, is the learning mind. And without that learning mind, you are only reacting to situations, then you are picking up prejudices, possibly picking up a few truths too along the way, but those prejudices create the illusion.
So let me just pick away at this a little bit, because let me share with you how I understand this distinction between psychological time and physical time. It seems to me that physical time entails a movement. Krishnamurti also says this: time is a movement.
Well, the Earth is going around the sun, and
Earth is going around the sun.
Yeah, 365 days.
Yeah, or you can think of a train going from whatever, Los Angeles to San Francisco. That's a movement through physical space, and therefore it occurs in what we can call physical time or chronological time, whereas psychological time also seems to be a movement, but it's a movement of another kind of entity. It's not a movement of a physical entity, it's a movement of the psychological entity, the inner entity, the ego. And the illusory nature of it is where I have a little bit of difficulty, because it seems to me that that kind of time, it's not the time which is illusory, it's the psychological entity moving through the time which is illusory. But it seems like it's the same time per se. It's still, in a sense, chronological time. It's just that I have a different entity that is moving through it. So it's not the time per se which is illusory, it's the entity which is moving. I can project the notion that I will be happy if I become thus and such, and I can predict a time when it's going to occur. It's going to happen at the end of the summer. And that's a chronological time. So it's the entity which is moving rather than the nature of the time itself. That's how I understand it.
Yeah. I think one can improve upon the language, but that won't change the fact. The fact is that in the field of psychological change, time doesn't help. And in the realm of physical change, time helps. The two times, if you know that this is true, that's it. If you don't know this and you think that here also time helps, then it's psychological time. Psychological time is an illusion, or the ego is an illusion.
And you're saying that the only significant psychological change is perceiving illusion as illusion,
Yes.
which is a perception which does not occur in any kind of time, does not occur in psychological time or chronological time.
Well, it occurs in chronological time because you may not have the insight for 10 years. Doesn't mean you are gradually building towards it. You didn't, Krishnamurti had the pepper tree experience in 1922. He didn't have it in 1920. So chronological time passes irrespective of whether you have insight or don't have insight, because the earth will not stop going around the sun. That's how you define time. But the perception for him occurred in 1922. Now, if it was as a result of time, we can find out what all he ate from 1920 to 22, what exercises he took, how much did he sleep, and repeat it and see whether you get it, the same experience or not. I bet you that it took $1 million to one that you won't get the same experience, because it has not a causation behind it. It's an uncaused thing. Insight is an uncaused thing. It
So
happens not because of you, but in spite of you.
So you're saying it occurs in chronological time, but not because of chronological
That's
time.
right, and it's similar, therefore, to a quantum transition. Quantum transition takes place in time, but doesn't take time. The electron disappears here and appears here. It doesn't gradually go from here to there.
It's discontinuous.
Yes, it's discontinuous.
Can I just ask, when time, psychological time is affected by state, so depending on how you're perceiving, if you're in danger or if you're sliding towards a truck or something, time slows right down. You experience a psychological time. So it seems to me that there is an internal time, depending on state, which isn't directly linked all the same time in the same process you would experience it at all times. So it does seem dependent on psychological state. And with insight, I was just going to say that...
Yeah, that's how Einstein explained relativity. He said if your finger is in boiling water, the 1 minute is much too long, and when you are talking to a nice, beautiful girl, that 1 minute is too little.
Exactly. And with insight, I was thinking that if insight is an energy, then am I right in thinking it doesn't have a mass, so it's outside of time, from a physics point of view? Sorry, those are the two things I wanted to say.
I'm reminded of two cases where I heard Krishnamurti say things that kind of bring question to this. One, it was an interview where he said, I don't like the word instant because it implies that everything has to happen at once. And another one is on the BBC interview, I forget the interviewer's name. The interviewer was asking him, so you're saying that a person can understand this immediately, have this insight immediately, with no regard to time? And Krishnaji said, yes, if he's gone very, very deeply into all these issues. So that means to me, it's dependent in a sense, or maybe not always, but generally speaking, he's suggesting there is some factor of progression, that you go into these things very deeply, and not necessarily in terms of time, like each insight is this moment, moment to moment to moment. But there is some kind of a process happening where then you become more capable of having this transformative insight.
I remember a time, one of the meetings with teachers at Oak Grove, and Krishnji was getting rather frustrated with us, as he often did. And at one point he said, "I can see that you people have never thought about any of these things before."
Well, yes, I mean, I think of it the following way, that there are lots of illusions at various levels of our consciousness, starting with very superficially just the superstitions of your culture, and then all these cultural divisions of coming from the training. Then deeper than that lie the psychological complexes like fear and sorrow and so on, the memories of that coming up from the subconscious and entering into the conscious. And deeper still, perhaps the idea of being a separate individual is also an illusion. So they lie at different depths. And when you start inquiring, and when you start doubting with a learning mind, obviously the simpler illusions will reveal themselves first and will go first. There is not a linear sequence. It's not as if you must get rid of superstitions and then cultural illusions and then psychological illusions and then the ego illusion. Because there is no causation. So you could also just come upon the freedom from the ego instantly. But the probability of that happening is very small because the illusions block the perception. So there is this other view, which also Krishnaji has explained, that religion is the gathering of energy. Suppose you discover for yourself, which is not very difficult, that comparing myself with other people is a sort of mental disease, and it causes a lot of problems in one's life. And you stop comparing, which is not very difficult to do. So you stop comparing with others. You're free from jealousy, from envy, from hierarchy, from superiority, inferiority, a whole gamut of things in which a lot of energy is wasted, a lot of internal friction. And so you now have all that energy saved for further inquiry. So that is in a sense something that has happened in time, because you have seen some illusion and ended it. But there may be other illusions at a deeper level which are still persisting. So you haven't cleared the whole field. Yeah, you're not yet total freedom. We don't know what total freedom is. But whatever amount of freedom you have from the ending of illusions gives you, saves you that much energy. Because if you become clear, for example, that this religious division and so on is nonsense, and your mind doesn't think in those terms, you don't hate someone just because he is Muslim or Christian, and you don't feel very separate. You're not even interested in knowing which religion any particular person is belonging to or which caste. So it's a lot of freedom. You can watch people without already having dislike and hatred in your heart. And so that's a fair amount of, you lead life more peacefully. And that is necessary. The relatively silent mind is necessary for further inquiry, provided you continue with the learning mind. So the real transition is to go from the reacting mind to the learning mind. It is not a sequence of achievements. I think that's a wrong way of looking at it. Achievements require time and so on. But this transition, that means the religious mind is the learning mind. We are not saying the mind that has freed itself of all jealousy and negative emotions and so on is the religious mind. No, the religious mind is an approach to what is. What is maybe anger, maybe jealousy, maybe frustration. How am I approaching that? Am I approaching it with a learning mind, or a suppressing mind and a interfering mind and a controlling mind, which is a reacting mind. So if I am approaching it with a learning mind, I'll learn, and the learning will start the process of change. Start the process of change. Yes, process occurs in time. It may take time, but time is not essential factor in this. It's not the essential factor. That's how I understand it.
Yeah.
It's a little different from the way Krishnaji has explained. Huh?
Time only exists if I think it into being, right? If I'm not thinking, thinking without thinking, there's no time involved.
I'm reminded of a question and answer. Do you have the book Meeting Life here? The book Meeting Life.
Maybe, not sure.
Yeah. There is a passage there where somebody asks him, what is transformation? And as I recall it, you must read it. He says, sir, transformation is there when you see disorder in your room and you put it in order. That is transformation, not something out of this world and so on. Then when you see that how politicians are behaving and so on, and you free yourself of that, that is transformation. And then when you see that competition is breeding all kinds of enmity and useless kind of society, then you free yourself of that competition. That's transformation. And as you go much deeper into it, you discover that thought denies love, then that is still deeper transformation. Ultimately it is to be nothing. To be nothing. So he's putting gradations on it himself, saying that as you start discovering, you will first start cleaning up your room, doing a little exercise. You begin there, right? But therefore don't say this is necessary to do that. It's not. You can have the 10th insight before the 9th one. It's not like a geometry where you have to learn each theorem sequentially, like that. No.
Yeah, I'm reminded of another thing that he said, that I read, that as soon as there's looking, as soon as you're looking at yourself, the transformation is already happening.
Yes. There is a certain amount of no, the transformation from a reacting mind to a learning mind.
Right, exactly.
That is already a transformation. Where that learning mind will take you is your destiny. But you have made the initial transition. And that means you have gone from the reacting mind to the religious mind.
I think the Buddha called that you're entering the stream. So as soon as you, I mean, he would have put it differently, but as soon as you start to become aware of yourself, become mindful of your thoughts and feelings, you've entered a stream which just basically takes you by itself.
The stream of learning, This learning being unlearning the false, is different from the traditional learning of adding knowledge. That is accumulative, and this is dissolving the false.
Gloria, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm wondering about karma, cause and effect. Is that all illusionary too? Because we're saying, like inquiry, we're looking at cause and effect, but that whole movement, if you were to follow it all, would take you back to the Big Bang. Like, I just wonder, what is cause and effect? Is it all illusion, or ultimately, because you're really going through a process of negation?
No, I mean there is, if you approach life with desire, it will have certain consequences. And those consequences are the effects of the cause which is desire.
Yep, okay.
Yeah.
So okay, because I'm just thinking, if you were to, where would a cause and effect end? It would have no end. It's a constant movement. Like.
So that is a chain. So the cause the effect becomes the new cause, and then effect, and so on. Yeah. And there are also certain cause and effect things which are circular. So they are like vicious circles. this itself, you approach with desire and you are energized by the achievement you want to make, and then you don't get it, then you feel frustration. If you get it, you feel fulfillment. Then the energy has disappeared because of the desire was energizing you, and so you feel stagnation, kind of boredom, state of boredom, until a new desire is born, and then this cycle begins again. So you are all the time going round and round in this circle, and you feel a certain movement, but that whole movement is no movement, in the sense that it is within a circle only, very limited space. And he said it's the movement in the psyche. That's a kind of illusory movement. There are several such vicious circles. I just took this as an example. To see that whole circle, you have to watch, and you will be aware, and you will learn, and then that perception breaks the circle. You get out of that circle.
So there is cause and effect.
Oh, there is cause and effect.
Physically and psychologically.
Yeah.
The illusion comes if you think that insight is caused.
But karma,
Right.
the religious people extended it to reincarnation and all that. That, I don't know whether that's a fact or not. There are people who believe in it, there are other people who don't believe in it.
You don't know. It's a mystery, I guess.
Yeah, I can tell you what Krishnamurti said, but I have no first-hand perception of my own to tell you what it is. He said, when he was asked, this was in 1928 or so, he was asked, is reincarnation a fact? And he said, sir, reincarnation happens to be a fact for me because I remember certain things, but I don't want you to believe in it.
Wow.
So he was against believing, but if you yourself come upon a state of consciousness wherein you have a perception about it, then the truth of it you will know, and that has value, meaning.
Oh, like when you've had it.
And he saw the truth of it. Yeah, that's what he was saying.
This may be a little bit of a sidetrack or something, reincarnation, but if you're interested in that, there's a memoir written by a man named Sidney Field called The Reluctant Messiah. And and there's an appendix, which is a transcript of a conversation that Krishnamurti had with Sidney Field, and I think Alan Nade was there. And I personally found that whole exposition, Krishnamurti's exposition of reincarnation, to be one of the most confusing things I've ever read by him. But he seems to be saying that the individuality, the whatever selfness there is of a person, does not reincarnate. But he acknowledges that something else takes place, which is that a stream of thought which has been that person enters into a larger stream of the thought of humanity and continues in that stream in some sense. And so in that very kind of specialized sense, he acknowledges a form of reincarnation. But it's quite an extended, it goes on for quite a few pages, and they really go into it at some depth. Sidney Field's brother had died, and he came to, and they had been lifelong friends, and he came to Krishnaji and said, I feel as though my brother is with me now. And Krishnamurti said, well, in a sense he is, because a strong personality, after they die, they leave something behind that he called an echo. It's like an echo of him, it still remains. And he said, and then he brought in time. He said it may remain for a few days, or if it's a very strong personality, it may remain for a few years. But I don't think that that's quite, the same thing as what the conventional notion of reincarnation.
No, it is influence, and it is collective karma. Collective karma is there. In India, all the people believe in casteism, and therefore their children believe in casteism, and therefore casteism continues. If they didn't believe in casteism, casteism wouldn't continue. So there is, in that sense, a collective karma of a nation or a group of people.
That becomes a bigger circular thing.
Yeah.
Keeps getting
But
perpetuated.
reincarnation was about an individual's karma, that you are locating that this is Krishna in the previous life.
Yeah.
And he lived in such and such a way and had
Yeah.
such and such sins, and therefore he's paying for it now, and so on. I don't know whether that is true, because that individuality itself is being questioned, that the individuality is just the structure, and the structure is destroyed at the time of death, completely. The brain and the memories, everything is gone. So how do you identify who is Krishna in the next one? But the influence of Krishna's thought, or Krishna's thought may not be important enough, but Hitler's thought has had influence, and it's still continuing in the Nazi party. Yeah, you can see that. So strong personality leaves behind an influence. Good one also, evil one also. So that's
And
a
that's
problem.
just sort of as an aside, why I think when Krishnamurti said nobody really ever got that, how can you know? Because there's still the movement of his teachings out there, and you don't.
No, till
well,
then,
that will be-
at that moment.
Well, yes,
He's
at that
not
moment.
saying never in future, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've gotten off into a little bit of a side path, but I can't resist going a little bit further down this
Yeah.
strange path, because Nora and I were talking at lunch about some of the surprising and unusual things which Krishnamurti said to Mary Zimbalist in her memoir, and this reminds me of one of those which seems to completely contradict everything that we've been saying about his views of reincarnation, because at some point he feels so much closeness with Mary and such a good rapport, and at some point, according to what she wrote, at some point he said to her, "I wonder if you could be my brother." Nitya,
Reincarnation
coming back,
of
right?
my
A
brother.
reincarnation of my brother. And she goes, no, that couldn't be, because I was born in 1915 and he didn't die until 1925. But it seems to be like an implicit endorsement of a very conventional notion of reincarnation. Again, as with so many of the comments that Mary records, you never quite know to what extent was Krishnamurti really speaking seriously or sort of whimsically, maybe a little bit playfully. It's hard to tell, but it's an interesting little footnote to this conversation.
He also records him when he's ill, but I don't know whether he was attributing this to being, when he had to enter hospital for an operation, speaking to Nitya, he has this dialogue with death, and saying, a little while longer, Nitya, not now, but as if,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. So there has always been that ambiguity of, he seems to see a problem with us hanging on to our ego and the continuity of our psyche, but at the same time, he sometimes seems to imply if we don't step out of it, it continues on, and it's always been an unknown to me to know how to interpret that.
Yeah.
And, when you hear statements like that, is that just the influence of the drugs he was under, or is it?
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
So I don't know, are we still talking about, is time necessary for inner transformation, or I don't know, maybe let's just open it up. Are there any other comments or questions of any kind?
Well, one question for me is this insight, which has no cause. If it is total, then, I'm trying to understand if he's saying it is possible to really end fear and end sorrow. Then what would the meaning of that be? Is that in that particular moment or instant, or is it something that the structure is sort of wiped out?
Yeah, he's, as I understand it, he is saying that whole ego field is one. Mm-hmm. But we see it as separate parts, desire as one thing, fear as another, frustration as another, jealousy as another, and so on, that they are all connected to each other. The metaphor which I can give to explain that is that of a huge tree, The ego is the root of the tree, and what manifests and what we in our consciousness at a given time is one branch which is fear, another branch which is desire, third branch which is violence, fourth one which is division, and so on at a time. Now, whatever manifests, we are able to watch that and look at the cause of that. Now, generally, we are satisfied with just eliminating that branch, and then our inquiry ends, because the inquiry was rooted in the fact that it was troubling us, and when the trouble ends, the inquiry ends. But he is saying every such negative emotion that you experience is also an opportunity to go all the way to the root. If you don't give up your inquiry just because you have become comfortable now, but continue with the inquiry, you can uproot the whole tree, which would mean you can see the whole field of the ego and see the falseness of it. That approaching life in a particular way is creating this ego field, and if I don't approach it, I get rid of the whole thing. But that has to be a perception and not a description, like what I'm giving you is description. Yeah.
But the question is, even he used to say, well, somebody would come up and challenge him, he would have to look at it, or he'd have to see, no matter what. So, is whether that is gone, if you did manage to see the totality of it, or whether you were always susceptible for it to reoccurring, or it would be simply easier to see again once something. I don't know.
Yeah, no, the susceptibility is always there, because all that it needed for formation of the ego is always there with the sage also. It needs memory, it needs imagination, and it needs this instinct of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. He has the instinct, he has the memory, and he has the imagination. But he's so aware of the danger of it that he doesn't let it go in that direction. Yeah. So the awareness is the protection. Awareness of the danger is the protection. Just as when we are so aware of real dangers like fire or something like that, then you have no desire to go near the fire. No, it doesn't require any temptation or anybody to tell you that you should not go near it. As a child, you may need to be told, but the adult knows so clearly. So when the mind is clear, there is no such thing as temptation and no conflict.
Other comments, questions of any kind?
Well, I just hear it continually coming back really to where we started, which is in this process of coming with a learning mind is freedom. I mean, it's degrees of freedom if one is learning rather than reacting.
Yes.
So it's not really that we're looking for, okay, what's the end point? Do we get rid of fear or we get rid of that? It's to maintain this freedom within the know, within everything we are, everything we're used to, all of these illusions, everything we've believed in, to bring in this lightness, this questioning, to me it's a process. It's totally new. It's just simple in a way.
Yes, this is what he said. He said the learning mind is the religious mind.
Yeah.
And the temple and the church and the mosque are not religious places because there is no learning taking place there. But a school can be. A school can be a religious place provided this kind of learning is fostered there.
So in a sense I'm saying, do we need to concern ourselves with the outcome, trying to get somewhere, trying to...
No, that makes it in...
We simply need to be in this process of bringing... That we can do. We can bring a learning mind.
The moment you have a destination in mind, you have turned it into a desire process, an achievement process, which is the ego. So that's a wrong way of going to it. Yeah, just do it because that's the right thing to do. That's all. Wherever that takes you. So there has to be a certain openness about what might come. Yeah, not seeking a result. Yes, Guru, you had answered something.
I guess I've been thinking, history has at least said or shown that people that have had inner transformations have all done some sort of practice or some methods or whatever else in order to, for example, the Buddha did 40 or 50 days of penance and all that, and other people have done similar or other things. So the question is, has anybody, the way in which Krishnamurti is suggesting this, has anybody gotten to that end point without wanting to get to the end point? Because from what I have at least read in the literature is, it doesn't matter you want to have inner transformation or not, but it's most important you start somewhere knowing that you're not there, and then the process itself can take you where, if you're sincere enough, it will get you there. So the question is, I understand you don't want to look at the result, but is effort not needed in any of this is what I'm trying to.
You mean conscious effort? Not in the perception of truth, but there are a lot of things you would want to achieve which is not, which are helpful, which are not connected with the quest for truth directly. That is,
Directly, they may be indirectly connected.
in the sense that, for example, to have an energetic body,
Yeah.
and not to overeat, not be overweight, to do yoga so that you have a flexible body. So it's a misunderstanding of Krishnamurti that he was against any kind of technique. What he was saying was that there is no technique to come upon the truth. There is no causation there is no path to truth. That is the insight. But there is path to good health. What is the right kind of diet? What is the right kind of exercise? How much should you sleep? All these factors. And it helps. Of course, the body needs to have energy, and if you are lazy in your body and so on. But the learning mind, if you have the passion for learning, it will direct you there.
So no effort is needed there, if you have the passion is what it is. So
No, the effort to learn is there, no.
Okay.
The effort, you will have to find out what is the right diet. So that effort is there and you are doing it, and so yoga requires a certain amount of effort. You learn the correct way of doing yoga. There can be wrong ways of doing yoga. There can be a teacher, a guru, from whom you learn. But the guru can't give you the truth. He can give you correct postures for yoga, and the yoga will help you to have energy, and you need energy also for inquiry. So like that, indirectly there is preparation, indirectly, but there is no path to truth. There is not a fixed path you follow that to come upon the truth, because truth is that insight or perception.
How would you say, or how would you characterize, not there a kind of intermediate activity? When I say intermediate, what I mean is at the very indirect level, we have good diet, I'm going to get plenty of sleep, I'm going to take exercise, and at the extreme other end, we have radical transformation, total insight into the structure of consciousness, deep insight which is uncaused. But is there not some intermediate activity which just consists of the daily observation of thought and feeling throughout the course of the day, and observing what unfolds from within according to this relationship, that incident, the next event? And that sort of intermediate activity, is there not a certain deliberateness, a certain sense of, I don't know if you want to say effort, but a certain sense of diligence and sustained observation, which requires deliberate exercise of attention over a period of time.
Yes, there is. I mean, it's like doing experiments in order to learn. So you can do yoga with a view of achieving a certain level in the body. You can also do yoga just to discover what it does to your body. You can do fasting to discover what is your dependence on food. So when he says find out what is the right place of everything, you're going to experiment in order to find out the right place of that thing. Yeah. So if you do the technique experimentally, it's part of your learning. If you do it with an idea of achieving a result, then it's not part of learning, it becomes an ego process.
Yeah.
So the desire to achieve an end becomes ego, the desire to learn is not ego. That subtle thing is there. I mean, it's still desire.
Quite subtle, because it can change from moment to
he
moment.
did yoga and pranayama 2 hours every day. But he was not saying that that is necessary for you to come to the truth. Somebody else may jog, somebody else may do some other form of tai chi or something. You need to have, he pointed out that body, mind, consciousness, logic and affection, the whole thing, there has to be a balance, holistic, harmonious balance between the two. There is one interesting conversation which I have reported in my book where Radha tells him one day, Radha Bernier, that, sir, you are very tired, you have done all so much, can't you postpone that evening engagement which you have? And he looks at her and he says, my body does not, what word did he use? My body does not resist what I want to do.
Yeah.
That means the body is in harmony with, if he is wanting to do something, the body helps, the mind helps, the emotion helps. The one is not in contradiction to another. Otherwise there is conflict between two different parts of you. Yeah. So that's a kind of harmony which you come to. Which means you have to pay attention to the body, you have to pay attention to emotion, to your thinking, everything in life. So it's all connected. You do that. And to do that, you may practice various techniques. That's part of self-knowledge. The techniques you practice in order to learn about your relationship with that and to put that in the right place. So that's why it is important not to derive a new morality out of Krishnamurti's teachings. He has said very clearly that you cannot practice virtue. So don't try to create a new do's and don'ts like all the religions said, because one is often conditioned into thinking like that what is he trying to tell me, what should I do, what should I not do? There is nothing in Krishnamurti that says do this, don't do this. You use your intelligence to decide what to do, what not to do. And that intelligence you get through the learning mind, because that's how you grow in wisdom, and your wisdom will tell you what to do. I am reminded of an address he gave in the United Nations in one of the societies called Parliamentaries. He talked about this division between countries and the violence, cause of violence and all that. At the end of his talk, someone asked him, all this talk of non-violence is very well, but what should you do when a robber attacks you? And his answer is very classic. He said, sir, first learn to live peacefully. Not for one day or 1 week or 1 year, but for 20 years. Then you will know what to do when the robber attacks you. So he's sort of saying, you want the end result without doing the homework. And I'm saying, do the homework first, the intelligence will come and the intelligence will tell you what to do. Don't ask me what to do.
But would that intelligence not always be there? Is it possible it's always there and that it's just covered up by all of the conditioning?
You see, when you have learned something, it becomes easier, no? Next time onwards, whether it's mathematics or whatever. If you have done something, you perceive it more quickly. There is a certain sensitivity which comes, a familiarity with it. But we are not familiar with self-knowledge, with ourselves. So the way I look at it is, we have been trained into how to grow in knowledge. And that has become our tradition, because through education and all that, we have acquired a lot of knowledge. He is talking about how one can grow in wisdom. And self-knowledge, he said, is the key to wisdom. And that we have not been trained into. And he is talking about this learning, which we have missed out in education. Yeah, learning about oneself. And that is the same as discerning what is true and what is false, so that the false ends in your mind. And the false, as we said, is at various levels of our consciousness, deeper and deeper levels. So this learning has no end. It is, you live with the learning mind, wherever that takes you. Let's put it that way. And that is the religious life. Not necessarily the liberated life is the religious life. No, that may be the culmination of it. But you may not get there, but you can start your religious life tomorrow if you just change from a reacting mind to a learning mind. It doesn't require you to change anything. It just requires you to approach it with a learning mind, whatever happens within you.
So the question of techniques and methods is a good place to end, because that's where we will pick it up this evening, vis-a-vis the question of meditation. So it's about 4:30. We'll take a break until 7. And in the meantime, I think dinner is served at 5:30. And so there we have it. See you at